You think healing will bring him closer. That if you finally become whole, he'll finally stay. But have you ever noticed? The more peaceful you become, the more distant he gets. He was drawn to the ache in your voice, to the uncertainty in your step, to the way you needed his presence like oxygen in your loneliness. He felt important there. Not loved, but needed. And when you started to feel less broken, when your silence stopped screaming for attention, he stopped answering. Pause here. Let that settle in your chest like warm truth. Some people do not love you. They love that you do not yet love yourself. Because as long as you're bleeding, they can offer a bandage. And that makes them feel irreplaceable. But the moment you begin to close your wounds, not with their comfort, but with your clarity, you become a stranger to the version of them that only knew how to feed on your fear. You didn't confuse him with love. You confused survival with connection. What you called missing him was often your nervous system craving the chaos it had adapted to. This is what trauma does. It makes the pain feel like home. It wires your body to feel safest in what is familiar, not in what is healthy. So when someone shows up inconsistently, leaves you questioning yourself, pulls you close only to push you away, your system doesn't scream, danger. It whispers, this feels like love. Because somewhere in your past, maybe as a child, maybe later, love became linked with anxiety, with trying harder, with earning affection, proving your worth, and waiting for breadcrumbs. And so, you repeated that pattern. Not because you were weak, but because your body was trying to protect you. In the only way it knew how. It chased what felt familiar. And familiar was him. But here's what most people never understand. Some relationships only function when you're unwell. They require your self-doubt to keep their power. They depend on your overgiving to avoid the emptiness they carry inside. They only survive if you keep shrinking. Because once you expand, once you find your center, reclaim your voice, and stop over-explaining your silence, you become unpredictable. You become free. And freedom is terrifying to someone who only knows how to control. He didn't fall for your wholeness. He fell for your ache. The version of you that apologized for needing more, that mistook crumbs for care, that stayed quiet just to keep peace. He admired the light in you, but only as long as it stayed dim enough not to cast shadows on his own emptiness. Understand this. Healing is not always celebrated. Sometimes, it's punished. Not by you, but by those who benefited from your wound. They don't say it out loud. They just grow distant. Make subtle jabs. Say things like, "You've changed. You're too much now." Or worse, "You think you're better than me." No. You don't think you're better. You're just not bleeding anymore. You're not begging anymore. You're not needing someone who only shows up when you're broken. And that is threatening to someone who based the entire relationship on your unhealed parts. Your nervous system, over time, begins to learn. It learns to crave peace more than intensity. It learns to recognize the high of inconsistent affection as a form of manipulation, not magic. And that's when everything changes. That's when healing begins. To pull the mask off the relationship. And you finally see. It wasn't love. It was dependency. Mutual wounding. A dance of pain mistaken for intimacy. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. And the longer you confuse being needed with being loved, the longer you'll stay trapped in a role that was written for your wounds, not your worth. There was a woman who used to text him every time she felt the ache return. Not because he offered healing, but because his silence gave her something to chase. And chasing felt like movement. It kept her from sinking into the stillness she was so afraid of. She thought if she could just say it better, more clearly, more softly, more completely, he would understand. He would come back. He would stay. But he never stayed. He responded just enough to keep her hoping. Just enough to keep her confused. He never truly met her. Only mirrored her longing. One day, something in her broke. Not in the way it had broken before. From begging, from silence, from rejection. This break was different. It wasn't loud. It didn't shatter. It opened. She woke up and didn't text him. Not out of spite. Not as a game. But because the ache was finally hers to hold. Not his to fill. She sat with her loneliness like it was a guest. She asked it where it hurt. Where it came from. What it was afraid of. And loneliness, in its honesty, whispered, "I never wanted him. I wanted presence. I wanted someone to sit with me the way I've now learned to sit with myself." From that day forward, something shifted. She didn't need closure. She didn't need to be understood. She didn't need to explain why she finally walked away from a conversation that was never truly mutual. She didn't harden. She didn't armor up. She just stopped bleeding for someone who wasn't even offering a bandage anymore. Healing doesn't always look like light pouring in. Sometimes it looks like silence not being unbearable anymore. It looks like breathing through the nights you once used to fill with apologies. It looks like sitting at the edge of your longing and not jumping in after it. And this is the moment the transformation begins. She began to notice things. That peace no longer felt boring. That quiet no longer felt threatening. That stillness no longer screamed abandonment. It started to feel like a return. Not a punishment. She used to see herself through his eyes. Too sensitive. Too emotional. Too intense. But the more she returned to herself, the more she realized. It wasn't that she was too much. He was simply too unavailable to meet her there. And so she changed. But not into someone colder. Not into someone detached or disinterested. She changed into someone rooted. Someone whose emotions no longer controlled her, but taught her. Someone whose silence was no longer a plea, but a presence. She began to love from wholeness. Not from hunger. To give from overflow. Not depletion. He noticed. He reached out again. Maybe not with words, but with energy. The kind of energy that tugs on your memory. The kind that knocks on the doors you've already locked. The kind that used to work. But not anymore. This time, she didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Not to punish. But because that door no longer led to where she was going. And she had finally realized. He was not the destination. He was the lesson. This is the quiet revolution of healing. You no longer ask the wound to justify its pain. You stop writing letters to people who were never reading. You stop leaking yourself into hands that never stayed open. You stop mistaking the ache for evidence of love. And instead, you let it guide you back to yourself. Because real transformation isn't about forgetting them. It's about remembering you. The you that existed before the pleasing. Before the performing. Before the shrinking. The you that doesn't negotiate her worth. For a half-hearted reply. The you that doesn't audition. For someone who cannot sit with silence. The you that no longer believes. She must be unhealed. To be chosen. That is the woman he cannot reach now. Because she no longer lives in the space where pain was the price of belonging. She has come home to herself. And there, he does not exist. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. Lao Tzu. In the West, love is movement. Reaching. Grabbing. Fixing. Proving. But in the East, love begins with stillness. Not the kind of stillness that hides, but the kind that reveals. There is a teaching in Zen that says, when the pond is still, the moon can reflect itself. Healing is not about fighting your emotions, or conquering desire, or trying to become someone better. It is about stilling the water. Because only then can you see what's truly there. The woman who stopped chasing him didn't become colder. She became still. And in that stillness, she realized something. She had never actually seen him clearly. She had seen him through the ripples of her own need. Her own history. Her own fear of being left. Every time she panicked at his absence. Every time she replayed his silence. She stirred the pond. And distorted the reflection. But once she learned to sit. Truly sit. With the ache. The silence. The emptiness. A strange thing happened. She didn't see him anymore. She saw herself. And what she saw wasn't someone unlovable. It was someone uncentered. This is the path of stillness in Eastern wisdom. You don't reach outward to grasp clarity. You return inward to remember it. Because the deeper truth is this. Most of your suffering was not caused by him, but by what you believed his presence meant about you. His inconsistency made you question your worth. His silence made you narrate stories of rejection. His indifference made you try harder to be worthy. But that was never your task. Your task was not to win love. It was to recognize it doesn't require winning at all. In Taoism, there is a concept called Wu Wei, effortless action. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means aligning with the nature of things so deeply that your movement is like water, flowing, not forcing. She had been forcing herself into spaces that rejected her. Forcing conversations that weren't mutual. Forcing presence from someone whose soul was never truly in the room. And when she stopped forcing, everything revealed itself. There is also a Zen parable. A student asked the master, "How can I find peace?" The master said, "Return to the place where you lost it, and stay there." She returned. But not to him. To herself. To the place within. Where her silence used to feel like abandonment. And now feels like sanctuary. To the part of her that once confused holding on with being strong. And now understands that strength sometimes sounds like closing the door gently and walking away. Healing, in the Eastern view, is not about purging emotions. It's about making space for them without needing them to change. It's not about achieving wholeness. It's about realizing you never lost it. You only lost the ability to be still enough to feel it again. This is what she discovered in the cave of her own solitude. That when you stop trying to be enough for someone else, you start feeling whole with yourself. That when you stop begging for clarity from others, you begin speaking to your own knowing. That when you stop trying to be loved the way someone else defines love, you start loving in a way that doesn't exhaust your spirit. He did not leave because you healed. He left because your healing revealed. He was never actually there. Not in the way your soul craved. Not in the way your body whispered late at night. Not in the way you kept hoping silence would finally explain. He was drawn to your longing. But stillness does not long. It does not reach. It does not demand. Stillness receives. And that is why he disappeared. Because there was no longer a space for his ambiguity to live in. The still woman is not reactive. She does not chase. She does not explain. She simply sits in the temple of her own presence. And presence is power. Not the kind of power that dominates, but the kind that does not dissolve just because someone leaves. The kind that doesn't shrink when misunderstood. The kind that doesn't perform to be seen. He could not recognize this version of her, because the old version was easy to hold. Fragile, responsive, always reaching. This version meets the moment in silence. And lets it pass without clinging. She doesn't need closure. She has breath. She doesn't need the last word. She has stillness. She doesn't need to know why he didn't stay. She only needs to know that she is no longer waiting. And so the final teaching of stillness is this. You don't need to win back what you outgrew. You don't need to chase what couldn't sit still with your soul. You don't need to interpret his silence anymore. You've translated your own. And it says, I am not healing to get you back. I am healing because I finally remembered. I was never missing you. I was missing me. There is a silence that screams. And there is a silence that sings. You've known the first kind. The silence that felt like punishment. That echoed with questions unanswered. Messages unread. Love withheld like oxygen behind glass. But now, you are being invited into the second kind. The silence that holds you, not abandons you. The stillness that doesn't mean rejection, but return. You don't need to reply anymore. Not because you're cold. Not because you're playing a role. But because you have nothing to prove. To someone who only listened when you were in pain. You don't need to reopen old conversations. Just to feel seen. You don't need to send one last message. To explain what you've already outgrown. You can, instead, do something far more radical. Breathe. Be. Belong to yourself. When you feel the urge to reach out, pause. Notice where in your body that ache lives. Is it in your chest? Your stomach? Your throat? Sit with it like a teacher. Not an enemy. Ask it what it's trying to protect. What it still fears. What it wants you to know. And then, listen. Not to react. Not to fight it. Just to listen. Because sometimes, the ache isn't asking for him. It's asking for you. Your healing is not a race. It doesn't require perfection. It asks only for presence. So when the loneliness arrives, do not scroll it away. Do not drown it in noise. Do not text someone who only shows up to quiet your discomfort. Sit. In stillness. In discomfort. In the rawness of your unmet needs. And breathe. Breathe like the world is not ending, but beginning again. Inside you. You are not weak for missing him. You are human. But you are not healing to erase him. You are healing to reclaim your space. The sacred ground within you. That was once crowded with his silence. That ground is yours now. It always was. But now you remember. So here's your quiet practice. Not a to-do list. Not a goal. But a return. When you want to reach out, reach in. When you want answers, ask your breath. When you want someone to hold you, place your hand over your own heart. When you want to be chosen, choose your stillness. Because stillness is not what happens when nothing is left. It is what you find. When you finally stop searching outside yourself. Let others rush. Let others chase. Let others demand closure and reasons and roles. You will sit with yourself. Like a mountain sits with the clouds. Like the ocean holds the moonlight. Like the forest listens to its own leaves falling. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth anymore. You are not here to prove. You are here to be. You are not healing for him to return. You are healing so that even if he does, you don't forget the version of you that learned to sleep without checking your phone, that learned to walk alone without waiting to be followed, that learned to feel joy without needing an audience. And if he comes back, let your stillness meet him. Not your longing. Not your hope. Not your old ache trying to be understood. Let your silence speak first. If he can hear that, if he can sit in that, you will know. But if your stillness unsettles him, confuses him, irritates him, then remember, he was never holding you. You were holding on to him. So breathe. This is the moment. Not tomorrow. Not when you've fully moved on. Not when you feel nothing. Now. Here. With the ache still trembling. With the silence still echoing. With the softness still blooming. This is your altar. This is your sanctuary. This is your return. You don't have to go back. Just because he knocks. You don't have to open. Just because he suddenly remembers what you always offered. You are no longer a door. You are the whole house. And not everyone was meant to live inside you. So sit. Sit with your strength. That no longer needs to be loud. Sit with your voice. That no longer needs to convince. Sit with your beauty. That no longer waits to be validated. This is your stillness. Let no one disturb it. Unless they bring peace as their offering. You are no longer waiting. Not for the message. Not for the apology. Not for the version of him that only existed in your hope. The waiting was never about him. It was about the part of you that believed love had to be earned. But now, you are not earning. You are embodying. There's no rage in your silence. No bitterness in your stillness. Only the kind of peace that doesn't beg to be seen. Because it has already seen itself. Let this be your affirmation. You do not need to be broken to be held. You do not need to be desperate to be loved. You do not need to be small to be chosen. The man who deserves you will not be confused by your stillness. He will not flinch at your clarity. He will not fear your fullness. Because real love does not feed on your ache. It honors your healing. So if he returns, let him return to a woman who no longer lives where he left her. Let him return to the temple you built inside yourself. Let him bow. Or leave. But either way, you stay whole. Your story is no longer about being wanted. It is about being free. Free to speak without trembling. Free to rest without waiting. Free to love without needing to lose yourself in the process. You are the quiet before the storm. And the calm after it. You are not what he couldn't hold. You are what no longer holds him. So go. Not away from him. But toward yourself. Toward the garden that grew. While you were mourning the one who wouldn't water it. Toward the voice that doesn't ask to be enough. Because it already is. And when you stand there, Not as a version he wanted, but as the truth you've become. Whisper this to the wind. I do not hate you. I do not need you. I do not chase you. I bless you. And I release myself.